When injury takes you out of the game, it's time for your team to step up. At Alina Health Orthopedics, you'll get expert care backed by a whole health system of providers. With convenient locations, virtual options, and an app that gives you 24/7 access to your records, test results, and care team, they're always close to the care that you need. Schedule now at alinahealth.org/ortho.
Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on when this finds you. Welcome to the Sound of the Loons podcast presented by Alina Health Orthopedics. I'm Steve McPherson, and I'm joined by noted Englishman Callum Williams. Cal, let's just start with the obvious. How are you feeling after England's win over Denmark in the semis to book a trip to the final against your mortal enemies, Italy? I don't even know if Italy are your mortal enemies, but it's a great situation for England, no doubt.
It still feels quite strange to say, Steve, England in a final, because we haven't been in a final since 1966. So there are legitimate generations that have never seen this before. So I would go as far as saying if there's a cloud above cloud 9, that would be the one that I'm on.
Cloud 10, presumably. I don't know.
Cloud 10, yeah, possibly. Cloud 9.5, maybe. Because 10 out of 10 is usually presumed to be perfect, right? So maybe I'm on cloud 9.5. If we win it, then I'll be cloud 10. But
all right. I don't really know the etymology of the whole cloud thing. So while you're talking, I'm gonna look that one up. Go for it. Keep going.
I just don't. I just can't think of the appropriate way to describe it, Steve, because it's once in a lifetime type stuff. It really is. This doesn't happen to England. We've been, semi-finalists on 2 separate occasions after '96. The most recent came in the last World Cup, and it was obvious that there was some sort of that there was a sign that this group that we seem to be moving into this new era with is capable of something. But I never expected us to get to the final. I thought that I would take a quarter final and say that's a good tournament. So to do it the way we have. To play as well as we have, albeit the Scotland game. I can't believe it, Steve. I'm just so unbelievably proud of the group, and England right now is to my knowledge. I haven't been back for 2 years or so, but to my knowledge, England right now is a very divided country politically. There's one thing, in my opinion, that can bring any country together, and that's football, and that's exactly what has happened in England. So, I'm just incredibly proud. I was a nervous wreck here at home yesterday, and I'm going to be an absolute shambles of a human being on Sunday. I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know how I'm going to cope, And it's strange, Steve, because I don't really get nervous anymore because, working in the industry, you do lose that little bit of connection because it becomes work and what have you. And so you do lose that little bit. Like, I obviously geographically as well, I can't follow, Aston Villa like I used to. It's just impossible now. So you do lose that little bit of connection. But when it's your country, it's different. And especially I think when you're abroad as well, you do become a little more patriotic when you're not living in the country, when you're, even when you're on vacation elsewhere, any chance to be proud of your country, you absolutely show it. So, it's been unbelievable, Steve. I've been fortunate enough to be able to watch a handful of games with about 30 other expats, at a certain pub in downtown Minneapolis. And, I just can't wait to see everybody again on Sunday. And I hope we're celebrating. And look, if we're not celebrating, if we don't win the tournament, then that's fine. Ultimately for me, this has been a sensational tournament for England. And it should be viewed as a success regardless of the results.
Yeah, it's been a great story. Here's the origin of Cloud 9 for you. Okay, ready? In September of 1896, the cumulonimbus, which is a giant rain cloud, was listed as Cloud 9 in a new cloud classification. And then Cloud 9 became like floating on the tallest cloud on Earth. So there's your explanation for being on Cloud 9. So I guess it could be Cloud 10. Maybe you don't have to be 10 out of 10. It could just be Cloud 10. Maybe it's out of 15 or something like that. So, tell me, how do you feel? You are now in direct opposition to the chief marketing officer of Minnesota United, John Guaiano, who you might be able to tell from the name has some Italian heritage in him, and I'm sure is pulling for Italy. And so, what do you think about England's chances against Italy in this matchup specifically?
Look, Steve, I actually said this before the game against Denmark. I said my heart says we're going to go and win it. My head says we're going to lose in the final. I think Italy have been so sensational during the tournament. They've been much more attacking minded than people expect from an Italian side. That over the last, since I can remember, the last 20 years or so, they've been very defensive minded. They've been focused on building out of the back slowly, patiently, and it just seems like they are undergoing a new era themselves as well. There's so many good young players, particularly in the centre of midfield as well. I'm a big fan of Verratti, who I think is underappreciated at Paris Saint-Germain. Insigne is sensational. Immobile is wonderful when he gets into the right spaces. So it's no coincidence, Steve, that the biggest task for England is going to be in the final. That's you don't just get to the final on a whim, So in terms of, if you're asking me what I think is going to happen, it's a final, isn't it? It just could go either way. It really could. It just depends on certain things. So I don't know what Southgate's going to do with the team. I'd be very surprised if he changed anything. Maybe he does. Maybe he changes something. Maybe he sees somebody who can be more suitable to go up against an Italian left back or something. Maybe he changes something, because that's what a tournament is. You don't necessarily have to stick with the same 11 players the whole tournament just because they might necessarily be your best players. It's a tournament, and sometimes you have to accept your role in the tournament. So I don't know. I'm intrigued because it's always a really interesting tactical battle with an Italian side, whether it's on the international or domestic side. But right now, Steve, I'm just too nervous to even think about it right now. I'm just all over the place. I'm a shell of a human being. I tried to think about something else earlier this morning. I went for a workout in the afternoon, and I'm just all I can think about is the game, and I'm trying so hard not to. I've got dinner reservations with my poor wife this evening, and I know I'm just going to want to talk about the game, and it's just it's murder. It's murder being an England fan because this just doesn't happen to us. And as I said, for the first time since 1966, here we are with a real opportunity of claiming a trophy. So I know I'm going to be a wreck over the weekend. I'm going to be an absolute quivering, shivering mess of a human being. And I just don't even know how to explain how I'm going to get through the next few days. But I'm excited, obviously, but nervous in capital letters.
Seems like you're going to owe your wife a spa day or something to let, because she's going to receive a lot of energy from you over the weekend here at Cal. So can I say that one thing that I've always loved about Italy and the idea of the national Italian character in soccer, because when I think of Italy, I think of Ferraris and fashion and sort of like sleekness. And then the reputation of Italy on the world stage in terms of soccer is just being like lock you down, destructive, like just snail's pace, like grind it out. It's and obviously it's a country with all kinds of different areas and elements. You think of like northern Italy is a lot different than southern Italy, and there's a lot of different cultural elements, but it does sort of seem like in direct opposition to thinking about things like the Roman feel of like sportiness and sort of like sleekness, and that it's guys like Maldini and like these sort of like bruising center backs who are sort of the rep for Italy, which I love.
Yeah, I grew up, Steve, in an era where the Italians were about as hard-nosed as they come, and grew up watching some of the names you've just mentioned, like Paolo Maldini, like Alessandro Nesta, Costa Curta, Gigi Buffon, I caught the tail
Cannavaro,
end of
yeah.
Cannavaro, sensational, World Cup winner, and caught the tail end of Baggio's career, and was lucky enough to, have access to watch Italian football growing up in England, and very much enjoyed watching like Christian Vieri and all of these sensational Italian players. And like I said, it just feels like it's a new wave of Italians now. And I'm interested to see what they do, Steve. I don't expect either side to change much. That there might be a tweak here and there, as I said, to perhaps counteract whatever the opposition is doing. I think it's going to be a nervy, 1-1. It's got as much as it pains me to say, it's got penalties written all over it, and we're just not very confident on penalty kicks, England. So I don't know. I hope it doesn't. I hope it's done in 90 minutes, because my nerves will just not be able to take it. Just won't be able to do it.
Yeah, you won't. Penalties will be a disaster for you. So, well, let's take your mind off that upcoming game by talking about the game last night, Wednesday night, Minnesota United against the Colorado Rapids. To just sort of set the stage for the game, Minnesota, a 7-game unbeaten streak, following sort of a really tough beginning to the season, coming into a game just after playing Saturday at home to San Jose, a game in which they had the lead and then sort of lost it late. Again, it's one of these things where as you back up, you look at a win in Portland and you think, hey, if you had a draw in Portland and a win against San Jose at home, that's what you would expect. You had that, just the reverse of those things. So maybe it's not so bad. But the Quakes game, there were some things to be concerned about. Losing Michael Boxall, who was supposed to go to the Olympics. We don't know if he's going to go now. But he was supposed to play in this game on Wednesday. Romain Métanire, who's in France getting his green card, is not back yet. And then Bakaye Dibassy, who came back and had done tremendous work for Minnesota once he came back from that injury. He and Boxall together looked great. They had none of those guys in the back line. You lost 3/4 of your back line on the road against a team that Minnesota United has never won against at Dick's Sporting Goods Park. And the 1/4 of that regular back line that's still there, Chase Gasper, who is a tremendous player who has a lot of good qualities, is probably defensively the weakest of those 4 backline players, like just as a defender, as a pure defender. It's, I don't want to, they could have gotten a result. They absolutely could have gone out there and gotten a result. I don't want to let them off the hook, because I think the game didn't start on that front foot. They didn't try to press the issue right away, but this is a tough game. There's a little break coming up, and then they're going to get back at it. They're going to have a week and a half essentially to get back into it and get in shape to deal with the Seattle Sounders at home. What was your sense of the game, sort of from a tenor perspective over the course of the whole game and how it began? And if you ever felt like Minnesota United looked like they were going to get into it, to me, it sort of looked like they never really were going to get control of the game.
Yeah. I thought it was probably one of the worst displays of the season, probably the worst display of the season, I thought, because if you go back and look at the opening 4 games, which obviously didn't go very well, at least Minnesota played well, and at least they created chances and had opportunities, and there was a generic direction as to what they were trying to do. But I thought the front 4 were perhaps as bad as we've ever seen them. And I know it was their first real chance to play alongside each other. That'll only get better in time, but it didn't work. And credit where credit's due, because I thought the Rapids contained them quite well. But there were 2 things that really stood out to me, Steve, and that was one of them, was that I didn't think the front 4 were at the game at all. I didn't think they looked. I thought they looked jaded. I thought Robin Lod looked tired. I thought a couple of the players looked tired. It was obvious they played a lot of football over the course of the last couple of weeks. I thought 1 or 2 players didn't look sharp as well, and that's because they hadn't played a lot of football over the course of the last few weeks. The biggest thing for me, though, Steve, is that I thought Minnesota United were far too narrow against Colorado. a lot of the ball was attempted to be played through the centre of the park, which is nothing new for Minnesota United. But I just didn't think the two central midfielders that was their task. I don't think they did it very well. I don't think Alonso and Gregush had a particularly great game. As I said, Gregush I thought looked a little bit out of it. He's been away with Slovakia at the Euros. I know he didn't play much, but it's a lot of travel time. It's a lot of training. And as I said, I mentioned players who lacked a bit of sharpness. I didn't think Alonso looked particularly sharp. The main thing for me was that I don't think Minnesota got at the makeshift left back of Colorado enough. They were playing Austin Trusty at left back last night, who is traditionally a centre back. I thought that was a real opportunity for them to go at somebody who may be slightly uncomfortable. And because of the way that Robin Lod operates as an inverted winger, he tucked inside as he does. And, there was not much of an opportunity to go at Austin Trusty. If you think about some positives from the game, Steve, that the one player that I kind of thought, again, gave a good account of himself was DJ Taylor, who ran his socks off again. I'm not going to sit here and say he was spectacular, but he was certainly the best of a bad bunch. And I thought he ran his socks off. And a lot of that, I think, was because he actually made Austin Trusty look a little bit uncomfortable from time to time because he drove towards the left back. So I think that was the issue there for me, is I thought that Minnesota were too narrow. It was essentially two central midfielders up against the three in the centre of midfield for Colorado. There always seemed to be an extra man spare. Diego Rubio dropped from time to time as well, and Barrios and Galvan ended up almost essentially playing as inverted wingers as well. Barrios seemed to switch between the roles. And it was problematic for Minnesota for sure, but I just think there were several things that just didn't work last night. And like I said, for me, it was probably the most disappointing performance of the season.
Yeah, I think I agree with that, Cal. I think that, I remember looking back at those first four games, once we gotten a couple games into that unbeaten streak and thinking, okay, well, you go to Seattle on the road, everybody had written the Sounders off to start the season, saying they got too old. Jordan Morris is injured. They have, they didn't replace some of these important guys. And so we thought that was going to be not too difficult a game. But we now know that the Seattle Sounders look terrific this year. And Minnesota jumped out to the lead. They played well and then sort of broke down. And we saw, I think the Austin game is maybe my other, the loss to Austin is maybe my other candidate for as bad as this, partly because of being at home. But that was another one where it looked like, in terms of RSL and in terms of, now I'm blanking, what was the team? Colorado, right? That was the fourth loss was to Colorado. Yeah. Again, Colorado, Minnesota was in the lead and then lost, gave up 3 goals and lost. They broke down. There's a lot of good play and then a breakdown. This was there just wasn't, it didn't come together. It never looked, it sort of was a throwback to some Minnesota United games we had seen in the first couple of years of the franchise, where it was yeah, you're out there, but what is the idea? What is the concept? What are you trying to do on the field to sort of say, this is how we're going to play? And I think a lot of that comes from, again, having to shuffle the lineup. I think you see, again, in soccer, there's this sort of chain where these things need to sort of depend on each other. And as things sort of aren't there, if you can't compensate for it, it closes off other options, which closes off options. And then you run into this narrowness. I think it made me really appreciate Romain Métanire. Again, no shade to DJ Taylor, who I think did well, but it made me appreciate the extent to which Métanire bombs forward again. I remember it being such a revelation a couple of years ago to see him doing that, and to not have that presence that pushes up so hard and falls back hard in defense on that side. DJ Taylor was fine, but he was not Romain Métanire. And then you saw Colorado sort of pushing up really hard on those fullbacks. You saw Chase Gasper having to do a lot of defending early on. That meant that the fullbacks can't get up, in terms of getting up the field. And that means that your inverted wingers then can't really cut in the same kind of way because there's not that other pressure coming in from behind. You put in, I presume, I don't know, like I don't know if this is a rotation question because obviously Will Trapp has played a ton of games and everything like that. But it seems like you probably put in Alonso because you're hoping for a little more of that defensive solidity right in front of the back line. Alonso and Gregush is a little less aggressive than Hassani Dotson going forward. Maybe you wanted them to hold back a little more. But then that led to them sitting back there trying to find passes to pick out into the midfield. Reynoso had to drop deeper to pick it up. It's like it's this thing. It's like, again, you miss a couple people and then you have to keep adapting to the things that each of those absences creates. And you end up with a team that just doesn't seem to have connection, chemistry, sort of a verve, a sense of this is what we're trying to do. I did sort of find myself, I was going to say this, but I did sort of find myself wondering about that scuffle that Ozzy got into with, was it Callum Acosta? I think.
Yeah, there was a bunch of players, Cole Bassett as well. And
yeah, it was sort of, I think it was Cole most directly because he picked up the ball and he was like, Ozzy was like, give me the ball. And Cole was like, no, I'm going to bounce and then I'm going to throw it over your head. And Ozzy really took offense to that. And I sort of found myself wondering if that wasn't like Ozzy's attempts to galvanize the team a little bit, like to sort of bring that like a non play element that says we're not going to get pushed around. It didn't seem to work. You got a yellow card. It didn't go great for anybody, but I did find myself wondering if that was sort of a captain trying to be like, I'm going to make a stink about this in order to get everybody's attention and try to reset the feel of the game a little bit.
Possibly. I just think he wanted the ball.
Well, that's right. I mean, I don't think he was like planning it. I just think it's one of those things where maybe like as a captain for years and years, you're just like, this team is not clicking. We need something to make it happen. Maybe I'm going to make us think about this ball.
I think he wanted a reset. I think Minnesota wanted to play quickly off of the dead ball. But Alonso obviously coming in had not started since mid-May. So I go back to what I was saying earlier on, Steve, about him not perhaps being as sharp as one would expect. He's also now 35 as well, so let's perhaps reserve a little bit of criticism for Ozzy Alonso as well, who is still wonderful, but he's not the Ozzy Alonso of 5 years ago.
Sure.
So there were changes made that needed to be made. Will Trapp had essentially, apart from coming off against Dallas, I think it was, he'd essentially played every minute really of the season so far. So was warranted a rest. Hassani Dotson has played an awful lot of football recently as well. Let's not forget he was also with the US under-23s and perhaps needed a little bit of a rest as well. The main absentees were obviously the two centre halves, and I thought Callum came in and did okay. I thought Jukka Raitala, who came in and was thrust into another situation, I thought was okay. But I thought they both got caught out on several occasions. But I'm not convinced they had enough protection. I think the backline were very much left hung to dry. I don't think there was enough protection for them. Alonso would sit deep when he needed to, but like I said, not because of lack of effort. I just think because lack of sharpness. I think the back line didn't have the protection that they usually do. So it was obviously a disappointing performance, Steve. But again, I think this result shows how important Michael Boxall and Bakay Dibasi are to Minnesota United, and Callum in the effort for that example as well. But you're not going to win every game as well.
Yeah.
Let's remember this. After a 7-game unbeaten stretch, going to Colorado is always tough. Do I think the team should have played better? Yeah. Do I think it wasn't good enough? Yeah, absolutely. I agree with what I'm sure people are saying. But, it's not as if the world is coming to an end here as well. It's a first defeat in 7 games. Minnesota still find themselves comfortably in the playoff conversation. I think they remained sixth after the results last night.
I think they're seventh now, but
they're seventh now. Okay.
Yeah, but
the point being, they're still above the line,
mm-hmm.
which is where they should be, and in my opinion, where they will ultimately finish the season. So it's disappointing, but as I said, you're not going to win every game, in my opinion. It's just not going to happen. You're not going to win every game unless you're Arsenal in 2004. You just, and even they didn't win every game. That invincible season had a couple of draws in there as well. Sure. You're just not going to win every game. But it was disappointing, no doubt. I wonder how they get Unu involved a little bit more, because I thought he was really isolated. And again, it shows how much they rely on Reynoso and Fragapane to get involved. I thought Reynoso dropped a little bit too deep again at times and lost possession, which ultimately caused problems, which I know what they're trying to do there. I know Reynoso was trying to help them match up in the centre of midfield. But again, when you lose the ball where he did a couple of times, it's going to cause you problems. So ultimately, look, as I said, Steve, it wasn't a great evening at the office. Not one to savour. I think the team will, over the next couple of days, have a look at some tape and see what really went wrong. But for me, as I said, Steve, I don't think Minnesota were. I don't think they used the width enough. I thought they were too narrow. I thought far too much of the transition was going through the centre of midfield, which, as I said, is nothing new. But when you've got two bodies in there that perhaps aren't as sharp or are perhaps a little bit tired, it just didn't seem to come together in Colorado. And as I said, I'm sure they'll look at something over the course of the next few days and see what else went wrong. But I think you try and move on from this as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I also wonder if, you're talking about the amount of miles on some of these guys now at this point. Like, I wonder if those injuries hadn't happened, with the center backs, if you would have seen Chase also getting pulled out, because he has played every minute still to this point. And that puts a lot of wear on you. And I think you're right about it. Trap needed a break. They have depth in the center of midfield. They don't have depth along that back line, basically. If Raitala is playing in center back, you really don't have another left back on the roster right now. So that's difficult. I think it's also, to your point, it's a long season. We're about a third of the way in. You will eventually, there's probably going to be a point in the future when some of these guys are going to have to get back on the pitch and play more. And you hope that, as Adrian says after almost every game, when it's a guy's first game or they're just getting into shape, he'll be better for the 90 minutes. And I think that all those guys, DJ Taylor, Brents, Yuka, will be better for having played together then. Hopefully there's lessons that they take away from it that they can use going forward. A couple of side notes here. What was up with that non-corner kick that happened where the ball was clearly over the end line and William Yarbrough I was in the match day tweets, I was typing a corner kick from Minnesota and there was a throw and I was like, it was fully over the line, right? Like, I'm not crazy, right?
I don't understand. With all the technology we have nowadays, I don't understand how that's not given, Steve. And as broadcasters, we're sort of in a precarious position because we can't see the whole field. We see what you, the viewer, the listener, sees at home. So I think I might have even said it's a corner. I can't remember.
Yeah.
Because it's a corner. And it was a good 2 yards over the line, wasn't it? I don't know, Steve. Like I said, with all the technology we have nowadays, and I do remember saying I'm not a proponent of more technology coming in because at what point are we going to stop? Before you know it, we're going to be stopping the game to see whose throw it is. And that slows the game down. We don't want that. But something like that it's almost inexcusable, really, to understand how that happens and how a corner is not given there. But look, I don't have an answer, Steve. I was as perplexed as everybody else was.
Yeah, it was confusing. Other thing I wanted to mention, Avila's little kidney punch there on Diego Rubio. Not a smart move. One of those things that I'm like, I understand frustration. I understand frustration with Diego Rubio in particular. He seems like a pretty frustrating guy to play against. And I was also, like when it was called, I was like, I have no idea what they're looking at, because it looked like he just like decided to crumple. And I'm still not beyond feeling like he maybe played it up a little bit based on sort of the speed of his reaction. But it's clear that Ramon just socked him, like just gave him that little shot. Just don't put your team in a hole when you really don't need to be in a deeper hole. That's all I have to say about that.
Just don't do it. From a seasoned professional as well, who now is going to miss the next game, by the way, as well.
Yeah.
Just a silly move. Upon reflection, I think at the time, obviously we're not on site, so again we see what you guys are seeing. I thought Diego Rubio had gone down really easily. And upon reflection, when you go back and you see it, it's a clear little jab into the ribs of Diego Rubio. You just can't get away with it anymore, Steve. There's far too many cameras. You can't get away with it. You can. People watching this who play the game, whatever level it is, everybody understands that there's, little pinches here and there. You try and mess with your opponent psychologically. You perhaps step on a toe from time to time or whatever. It's just part of the game. It is what it is. But something like that's a bit too severe. And obviously now there's just so many cameras in these stadiums, you just can't get away with it. So not a smart piece of play from Ramon Abila. And I'm interested now to see what Adrian Heath says and how he addresses that, because as I said before, Steve, I just didn't think Abila was the right signing for this team. I understand what he offers. I understand what he gives to the team. But something like that, I think is almost inexcusable, really, especially when you're 2-0 down, especially when you're trying to get yourself back into the game. In that situation, it's an attacking free kick as well. Just get on with the game. He's played in Argentina. He's played his whole career in Argentina. You're telling me he's not had a little stab, a little elbow or whatever, like from time to time from an opponent, and you just get on with it. It just is what it is. Is it frustrating? Of course it is, but I think a little rush of blood to the head there from Ramon Abila, and like I said, I wonder now. I don't think it warrants any further punishment, but it certainly warrants a conversation, I think, from Adrian Heath.
Yeah. When injury takes you out of the game, it's time for your team to step up. At Allina Health Orthopedics, you'll get expert care backed by a whole health system of providers. With convenient locations, virtual options, and an app that gives you 24/7 access to your records, test results, and care team, you're always close to the care you need. Schedule now at allinahealth.org/ortho. All right, let's take a little spin around the Western Conference, mostly here, talking a little bit. We got a little time. I imagine we'll do another show before the Sounders. So interesting things that have happened over the weekend. Toronto got the fire your coach bounce there after parting ways with Chris Armas following a woeful stretch of games for them. They jumped out to a big lead on New England Revolution, and then the refs came back, nearly got the draw out of it, but it ended 3-2. I misjudged that one because I didn't, I was playing fantasy and I was like, well, Toronto looks terrible and they just fired their coach. But now I know that they can actually play, which is bad for Chris Armas. People were sort of discussing this last night. Like it's a little rough when, you have the same players out there and they suddenly do a lot better under a different guy. I mean, some of the same players. It was the first game where Pozuelo and Jefferson Soteldo were both on the field at the same time. Obviously having your two of your DPs there is a big difference. But what's your feeling about? I know we talked about Toronto in the run up to the season and the question of like if Chris Armas was the right hire, like if it was going to work out after not having a terrific track record at Red Bulls. I mean, the team had some success, but they didn't sort of go to some new level under him, basically. So, what's your feeling on Armas in Toronto and what they're looking like going forward?
I may get in a bit of trouble for saying this, Steve, but I'll be honest. As we had previously stated on this podcast, I'm sure Chris Armas was not the right appointment, and I question why that appointment was made, because he did okay at the Red Bulls. He was fine, mm-hmm. But it wasn't exactly eyebrow raising. He did a good job. He was okay. After speaking to people throughout the season, it's now become clear to me that the reason why Chris Armas was hired is because Ali Curtis is the GM there. Let's not forget, Ali Curtis and Chris Armas worked together at New York Red Bulls. So that would be the overriding reason as to why that appointment happened. The thing is, and I'm all for people being given an opportunity as well, regardless of what we say, whether they're right or wrong person for the job, you give somebody an opportunity. And Toronto did. But to be as poor as they have, to have the players come out and say that training was woeful and they didn't understand their identity, they didn't know what to do. Josie Altidore was criticizing the training. He's off training on his own somewhere in Florida. They've been unfortunate with injuries, as you mentioned, with Pozuelo, and Soteldo has been away at the Copa America with Venezuela. I think that there's elements of it where Chris Armas has been unfortunate. But ultimately, I just don't think it was ever the right signing. It was never the right appointment, in my opinion. And you saw the way he was trying to play with Toronto as well. He was trying to execute this high-pressing system that he implemented, quite well with the New York Red Bulls because he had the players to do it. I just think he approached it the wrong way at Toronto. And like I said, they are a team that when you put them together, when you put it on paper, I've got the starting 11 in front of me here from that Revolution game. It's still not as strong as the 2017 championship team that we saw, but it's a very, very good roster. And there's absolutely no reason as to why they should be bottom of the Eastern Conference. So a change was needed, but it was either going to be Chris Armas or Ali Curtis. And Steve, I think now Toronto FC have to get this next appointment absolutely right. Because if they don't, I think then you have to start questioning Ali Curtis. You have to start questioning Bill Manning, who's the president of TFC. And you have to perhaps start questioning people at Maple Leaf Sports Entertainment, who ultimately own Toronto FC. I wonder what they're going to do. My initial thought is because of what Maple Leaf Sports Entertainment do. They've done it with the Raptors, I believe. They've done it with the NHL team. And now they've done it with Toronto. They often hire domestic coaches. Mm-hmm. They don't often go for massive names. And so I wonder, are we again on the verge of seeing Toronto FC going with a not huge name and somebody who will perhaps come in and ride the ship and steady it a little bit and try and get them to sneak into the playoffs. If you look at the last two hires, Steve, Chris Armas and Greg Vanney are not big names at all. They are domestic MLS coaches. So that seems to be the way that Toronto are going to go. That seems to be what they've been doing for the last couple of years. For me, and I've gone out and said this on social media, and I think I might have said it on the television last night, the one they should go for, in my opinion, if they can really, really go and make a serious play for him, is the manager of River Plate right now, an individual called Marcelo Gallardo, who has long been linked with a move over to Spain. I think he interviewed for, it was the Real Sociedad or Real Betis job in La Liga at one stage. He's never quite had the chance to go over. He's 44. He's ambitious. He knows how to deal with pressure. Obviously, working at a club like River Plate, I think he can handle big players, big personalities. I think he'd be a perfect appointment for Toronto FC. But the issue is, how do you get him out of his contract at River Plate? Because that would take some doing for sure. So that's for me what Toronto should go and do. Go and get Marcelo Gallardo. Whether they can actually go and do it or not is the question. And like I said, I know of one or two names that are of potential interest to Toronto, and unsurprisingly, they are domestic names. So we'll wait and see. But it's going to be one I keep my eye on for sure, Steve.
Yeah. Another, we've already mentioned this team on the podcast already, but can anyone slow down Seattle? They set a record now with 13 unbeaten since the start of the season. They've done it with a whole host of injuries. Eventually they will get back guys like Nico Ladero, et cetera. It's just, it doesn't look great for the rest of the conference, given that they still seem to be not at full power, but they are just executing tremendously well. So is anyone going to get Seattle out of that number one spot this season?
Well, I think Kansas City did it for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And I think if anybody will, Kansas City will, because they've spent a lot of money. And Peter Vermees has done this for years. If anybody can finish top of the West, it would probably be them. But at the moment, it looks like it's going to be a gargantuan task for anybody to dislodge the Sounders. They've adapted so well, as you mentioned, Steve, without Ladero, without Jordan Morris, and they've lost a couple of other individuals as well. But what Brian Schmetzer did wonderfully was he adapted his system to play to the players that he has. And we've seen for the majority of the season now, they've operated in a 3-5-2, 5-3-2 in a transitional point of view. Alex Roldan has been reinvented as a right back. We saw a glimpse of it towards the end of last season, but he's a central midfielder, and he's been reinvented as a right back. Jimmy Medranda, who was at Kansas City for a long time, and then Nashville, and didn't quite get an opportunity, has seemed to fit in quite well when he was given the chance. Brad Smith has come back to the Sounders. He won it with them in 2019. I think Brian Schmetzer strikes me as one of these coaches where you want to run through a brick wall for him. He strikes me as one of those individuals. I've had a couple of interactions with him, Steve, and he seems like first and foremost, he's a nice guy. But he does seem like one of those individuals that's a very, very good motivator. I'm not necessarily saying screaming and shouting, but from a psychological point of view, he knows how to get the best out of his players. Like Callum Rowe, for example. Callum Rowe scored last night. Callum Rowe couldn't get a game in Kansas City. He was very good at the Revs for sure, but he couldn't get a game at KC. And now all of a sudden, he's in the first team whilst Christian Roldan is with the Gold Cap roster, and he's doing wonderfully. There's a bunch of players coming through from Sounders too as well. I think they've been so smart with it, and also the way that they're using Freddie Montero operating behind Rui Diaz as well. I think that the pieces have come together so well for the Sounders. I question if it's going to last the entirety of the season, because you need some things to work for the entirety of the year, and there's a few things that I'm not sure that will, but Seattle Sounders right now, Steve, are as good as anybody in this league, and they are deserving of that top spot in the West. And obviously now with them coming to Allianz Field in just over 10 days or just under 10 days, that's going to be the biggest task this year, the biggest challenge for Minnesota for sure. But I just think that they're so good moving forward. Everybody seems to understand their role as well. João Paulo in the six as well has been instrumental to the way that they play as well. So, Holding Midfielder Appreciation Society fan club here. So I think they're wonderful. They really are. Every person, every single solitary player has stepped up to the mark when they've needed to. And I think a lot of that is because Brian Schmetzer understands how to get the best from his players from a psychological point of view.
Yeah, absolutely. Schmetzer is very impressive, especially for a guy, like you said, he doesn't seem to have a ton of bluster, or, he doesn't have a huge personality, but he just gets the job done. He sort of brushes off, any kind of plaudits. He's always sort of like, well, yeah, we set the record. That's great. But, we got a lot of stuff left to do. He's very down to earth, which is great. I think it is. I sort of feel like it's between them and SKC up at the top of the Western Conference. And it's probably going to be, they're going to be 1 and 2. Who knows exactly which way it's going to go. Again, I wouldn't put it, you're right. I would not put it past SKC just in the last couple of weeks, just sneaking into that top spot. They have looked fantastic. The analytics love them also. Speaking of analytics, the Galaxy are right behind them. I sort of don't trust that. Like, I think the Galaxy have played above their station. But, maybe that's why you get guys like Chicharito. They can finish goals that are incredibly difficult, or they can find ways to make something work if they can't. But I'm sort of looking at the Western Conference and trying to figure out how it shakes out. I'm not sold on the Galaxy yet, but maybe that's just lingering resentment over Zlatan. I don't know.
I think the Galaxy, for me, Steve, obviously something had to change because they were woeful last year, weren't they?
Yeah.
And given the context of what Galaxy are and the expectations there, something needed to change. And it turns out Greg Van is not a bad manager. It turns out it wasn't a fluke at Toronto for all those years. So I'm a big fan of the goalkeeper, Jonathan Bond, who came in from West Bromwich Albion and has settled into Major League Soccer very well indeed. I love Cabral, the French wide player, who to my understanding, Minnesota United were interested in at one stage.
Mm-hmm.
But even last night, Steve, against Dallas, without Javier Hernandez, they still comfortably pushed aside FC Dallas. And there's a couple of players here that I think don't get anywhere near the credit they deserve because of Hernandez's ability and because of the spotlight that's always on him. Sebastian Lletget, I think is an unsung hero, and we'll get plenty of attention on the national team. He seems to be Greg Berhalter's individual moving forward over the next couple of years as well. But Victor Vasquez, who Greg Vanney had at Toronto before he ended up going off to the Middle East, I think, for a year or two. He worked so well in Toronto and was a catalyst for them winning MLS Cup in 2017. Greg Vanney brought him back to MLS, and he's 33 now, I think. But Greg Vanney knows how to use him, and I think he's been great in the way that the Galaxy have used him so far. Sasha Kleshton, when he's been needed, has come in and been very, very good as well. They added a couple of defensive pieces as well. I'm a big fan of Viafanga, the left back. I thought Portland. I thought they were crazy when they let him go, but now understanding what they did with bringing in Bravo, the left back, I get it. But for me, he's been one of the best left backs in the league for a long time. So there's more to come from the Galaxy, no doubt. There's genuine expectation there, as there should be, because of the amount of resources that they have. That, for me, right there, Steve, could very well be the top three that we've mentioned. And I know there's a long way to go. There's a lot of football to be played. We're not even halfway through the season yet. But I think that could very well be the top three in the West. It wouldn't surprise me at all come season's end.
Yeah, I'll tell you that when I started this job in 2017 and Victor Vasquez was on Toronto, I always got Victor Vasquez and Maxi Morales sort of confused because they have both alliterative names, sort of a similar formulation. So I was always like, Victor Maxi, which team was that on? But I was just learning MLS. Now I know much better. I can tell those guys apart. So, all right, I'm going to end with I have a recommendation for you if you're into it. But for listeners, I just finished a terrific series, a book series. The first book is called The Three Body Problem, and that's sort of what people call this series. There's 3 books. The Three Body Problem, Dark Forest, and Death's End. It's a Chinese science fiction series. It got a lot of attention a couple of years ago, sort of 2016, 2017. It won the Hugo Award. It's the first book by a Chinese author, an Asian author, I believe, to win that. It's a prestigious science fiction award. I believe it got attention because Barack Obama said he was reading it. I may have mentioned that I was reading this book before, but I just wrapped up the final book. It's tremendous. It's really rare for me to find a series where it gets better and better and better and better. But I think legitimately the third book is my favorite, and I think it builds in this amazing way. It's very loyal to science and to physics. It sort of grounds everything in hard science, but there's a lot of humanity and questions about humankind's place in the universe and things like that. And it's super interesting and thought-provoking. I'm going to be thinking about it for a long time. There's also a TV series coming, I believe, for Amazon. They're making it into a TV show. So if you felt like you missed out on Game of Thrones because you hadn't read the books, you can just read these books now and you'll be ahead of the curve before the TV show comes on. So it's The Three Body Problem. It's by an author whose name is, I'm going to butcher this, I'm sorry if we have any Chinese listeners, Liu Cixin, which is Liucixin. On the American version, it's off. Those are reversed because of the way that Chinese names are. So, but I highly recommend it. It's a little tough to get through the first. At the beginning, there's a lot of time switches and sort of you got to kind of navigate through the first book. But by the end of the first book, you'll probably want to pick up the second, and then from there on, it's a fantastic ride. So, strongly recommend it, Cal.
I appreciate it, Steve. In terms of recommendations, whenever we can get away from football, which it looks like we will be able to for a few days now, I need to, so I don't think about the Euro 2020 final and drive myself crazy. There's a couple of recommendations. I think it's on HBO. My wife and I watched a series called The Mayor of Easttown, I think, or
Mayor of Easttown,
Eastwood. Mayor of Easttown, yeah.
Yeah.
Very, very good if you like the sort of murder mystery type thing. That was very, very good. I watched a sort of apocalyptic thing on Netflix a couple of weeks ago called Black Summer. So if you're into sort of like zombie type things, which I'm not really stiff. I get a bit of a thrill, like from horror. I hate horror movies. I'm not a horror person at all, but sometimes you need a little bit of a scare.
Yeah.
What one of them when you're watching it on the couch with your legs up, in case they grab you from underneath. The one of them. So I watched Black Summer, which was very good. And then there's a movie that's, I think it's Amazon Prime or something like that, called Tomorrow War, or The War of Tomorrow, or something along those lines. Which was fine. It was okay. If you're looking for it to pass, 2 hours, it's a fine movie. It's okay. Yeah. So, just about a war that's taking place in 30 years, and they come and recruit people from the past because they need them, and all of that kind of stuff. So, those are my recommendations, and happy to take any recommendations from anybody else as well, because I'm always looking for stuff to watch, because I'm just engulfed in football, and sometimes I just need something else.
Yes. All right. Good recommendations for the screen. I read mine on a Kindle, so it's also a screen, but for your books. So thanks for joining us for the 151st Sound of the Loons podcast, presented by Allina Health Orthopedics. Be sure to leave us a nice review on iTunes, or at the very least, a 5-star rating, and follow the team on Twitter at MNUFC. You can follow Cal at CalWilliamsCom. You can follow me at Steve Entris. Apologies, as always, to Richard Wagner. And remember, there's only one person in this whole world like you. People can like you exactly as you are.